Hi everybody, welcome to our first podcast in our look at the nervous system. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on the nervous system at the cellular level, starting with the neuron structure and how action potentials work their way down to send signals from one cell to another to elicit a response. So let's jump right in. Okay, so a little philosophy about the evolution of nervous systems in living things. We begin with the neuron, and the neuron is the cell that initiates, basically receives a signal and sends it down, eventually working its way from the actual stimulus down ideally to a receptor and a motor neuron to make something happen. So think of it this way. What's the stimulus going to be if I place my hand on a hot stove? Right? And so I get these signals that get sent back to get a motor neuron to contract my muscle to move my hand off of that hot plate. From there we can look at from a single cell, right? And the idea of some of our multicellular invertebrate animals, like a sea anemone, have what we refer to as a nerve net. Okay, so they don't have like a brain and a spinal column and all of that as being sort of the central nervous system. They have this netting of neurons that work their way to receive signals throughout the actual organism itself. So when you have something like an anemone that, you can't really tell top from bottom, there's no actual head, it works that way with the net. Then, once we started getting more complicated organisms, and you had the localization of different, very distinctive areas and cephalization, which just means a head formation, we started to see, areas that would develop, like a brain area, a centralized location that ended up happening. And so you have a flatworm there. You can see some of its structures are very similar. So we have this flatworm here. It's got sort of a head-like area here, and it sends down its signals and spreads them out via other nerves in different localized areas of its body. And then we have, specialization of different areas when we start talking about very, complex multicellular organisms like us. So something like us, we have our nervous system, which is a connection of the main part of our brain, sending information down through the spinal column and then branching outward to different areas and different systems from there. Our peripheral nerves, we've got our somatic system, our autonomic systems, and everything that we won't really touch a ton upon, but just to know that they exist. So when we're talking about really specialized areas, we have the main area and central nervous system of the brain and the spinal cord, and then from there we get the branching out of different locations, and each part is responsible for controlling different areas of our body. And so that's out of the way, and however else it happened. There's a lot of theories out there. So just to kind of keep in mind that there's all kinds of options and explanations for where they came. But what we do know is we know how they exist now and how they work now. And just as an aside note, yesterday I saw an article that talked about our administration putting in a boatload of money into research for mapping out the brain function and really, really working on how the brain functions. So similar to how we poured money into the Human Genome Project about 20 years ago, we are looking to pour some money into actually mapping brain function, which is an amazing thing to look at how synapses fire and how they connect and how they work. So let's talk about it from the cellular level. So the neuron. The neuron has very distinctive functional zones, and this is the actual specialized cell. And we're going to spend some time looking at this in the lab. You're going to get a sense to see of what one really looks like. And these are all shaped very differently. There are a lot of types of neurons, but each neuron has very distinctive areas. We have the dendrites. Okay, the dendrites are the receiving end of a signal, whether it's a signal from another neuron. It's what gets the input of the signal. Okay, and that's really located here. You can see dendrites are these little branching. Okay, so this is signal receiving here. The axon is a really big part because this axon here is the output area. This is what transfers the signal down and eventually shoots it out the end. Okay, so the axon begins with an area known as the trigger zone. And the trigger zone is close to the cell body. It's the location where the signal that the dendrites get has to be strong enough to literally trigger a chain reaction down the axon. And so if the signal isn't enough to, in essence, hit the trigger zone with enough juice, if you will, there's going to be no signal down. Okay, so it's that area, you know, that's going to receive, you know, kind of give the sense, was that enough information, was it not? So we have multiple types of neurons in our body. We have these types A and B right here. These are considered to be sensory neurons. So they're going to take in an input, so maybe the neurons that sit on the surface of our skin to sense for temperature, cold, okay, so sensory neurons, where we have over here C, this would be considered a motor neuron, where we get a lot of input signaling coming in and then sent down the axon, and in essence this would kind of continue on, that's not like the end of it, would continue on to something like this, okay, which would then elicit at a muscle, let's say. Okay, so there's my muscle. So these different axon endings attach at the muscle, and then what they release in terms of neurotransmitter at the muscle level cause the muscle to contract. Okay, so we're going to look a little bit at muscle contraction and how that works. So these two here, sensory, they're going to pick up the signal. You also have neurons that act as intermediates. So we have some neurons that run the length of our body, okay, which is kind of crazy, and the single neuron. But we'll have a neuron sensory. There might be an intermediate neuron that kind of continues the signal, followed by the motor neuron, or the whatever is going to cause the effect at the end. So some kind of an effector could be at a gland as well. You could have a neuron signal at a gland to release, you know, to begin secreting whatever that might secrete. So for this one, that's it. We're spending that time just looking at neuron anatomy. So this was a short and sweet one. The next one gets a little bit more complicated when we start talking about actual action potential and how a signal moves down a neuron. So take it easy, gang. Have a great night, and we'll see you guys in class. Bye.